Hello everybody, Raspberry Barrel here, and boy do I have to say it has been a long school year for me, and I am happy for it to be summertime again and for us to be back to reading biographies. And today we'll be reading a biography that has been a long time coming. I cannot believe how long it's taken me to get back to this wonderful creator. Today we'll be reading another biography by the wonderful Amber Springs Zero, who the last biography we did was Juna, and it's almost been 1 year since we've read that biography. I can't believe it! So make sure you go back in my videos and find that one so you can remember where we are story-wise before we get into this one. And please remember that this biography belongs to Amber Spring Zero on DeviantArt. A link to their page will be in the description. Make sure to check them out. And please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Let's get into this. And today we'll be reading the biography of Demetri the Renovator. The first son, their first heir, full of strength in his own care, here's the tale of a noble that can travel anywhere. Demetri Meadow, the Renovator. Born 220 a.m., died 278 a.m., reigned from 240 a.m. to 276 a.m., married to Holly Forest. Children, Lupa Meadow and Pandora Meadow. In the afternoon daylight, the first male heir and male magic wielder, Lord Demetri, is born in Admit Star 12, 220, according to the Asterian calendar. He inherited his father's brown hair and his grandmother's hazel brown eyes. There wasn't a sight of the mark that was on his right hand until we go along. He is a troubled but jolly young boy in his youth. Demetri is said to find any type of attractive frog in the wet ponds near for teasing a housemaid, grossing them out along with telling stale jokes like, if a princess kisses a frog, would he turn into a prince? Juna wasn't surprised. She told him a story of the princess kissing a frog before this started. His rarest find is said to be a golden-eyed hazel frog he found on their family's tour to the hazelnut forest at the age of 6. Demetri's first sight is him leading more to his masculine traits instead of fixating on dresses or wearing makeup like a noble heiress of his family. Besides this, the only interest he's able to concur on is letting his mother brush his hair with a floral decorated comb. His favorite color would be anything purple, no matter how it didn't match with him, for example. He wore lilac and lavender purples when it's day, and indigos when it's night. It may be due to his studious of colors, depending on when moods the skies were. His other sight would be a prickling interest at being taught the art of music at the age of 10. Juna would tell him fascinating tales involving fairy rings, folk tales that started with his ancestors Duchess Marie. Aside her showcasing and casting with her golden lyre, her son wished to be given an instrument too, except it wasn't until he was past the wand, something that Juna felt in her younger years. At the age of 232, at the age of 12, his mother, who thought he was socially tentative, has become associated with his first teachings of readings and writing music at song school. During education, his witted and deep thoughts into high and low median gave him good grades, even desirable praise from his instructor, Delphes. Aside from that, he carried for his language, notable for doing choir classes. When no one is singing for him, his voice has no rasp and it is no melodic, that they thought he inherited it from the otherworldly creature. In the mid-spring of 234 would not only be marked by the first passing to a mother and son, but also the first fairy wand passing in their history. Demetri was given his wand that morphed into a shape of a lute. A lily that used to be on his mother's lyre broke free of its golden stature, memorizing the white-colored petals in a bright sun ray, leaving the crowd in awe. Demetri's wand. His training started off pretty strong with basics, with light magic compared to his mother's. He carried quite knowledge when inspiration from his lute, with usages of charisma and willpower. One is a magical type being Dove's Harp, a healing spell carried by glowing lights in the shape of a dove bird. Another can be physical type, with a known one being Golden Shattering Club, a spell constructing a wand into a club made of light to penetrate and stun an enemy. An interesting record of his gene were the signs of him shown after binding his first spell. He grew a mark, this time on his right hand, that's similar to a lavender tremble clef. At the age of 15, after his finishing degree in song school, even before he attends college scholarship, he becomes associated with tutorage with lute lessons from his instructor named Matilda. A very interesting hindsight was his melodic singing soothing the high and low notes with the lute's music, even doing so with his eyes closed. Matilda and a few scholars, shocked by the measures that the boy can do with music, was how he gotten the title of the Melody Man. Due to his great work, Juna made a decision to have celebratory small banquet gathering with the meadows and stones. Of course, the reason why is his father's responsible for his son's duties and managing his homework studies on the courses he attended at song school. It was that moment he first met a 14-year-old Millennium albino girl, Lady Holly Forrest, the daughter of Lord Agnier Watterson and Lady Carnation Forrest. Holly took a slice of marzipan bread while looking at the guests chattering on her chair. Demetri would cup in too, due to the possibilities he was being with her, since Holly was unlike any girl enjoying waltz dancing, was practicing this as well. However, she was thought of her dancing as unpleasant to the eye and was a beginner at it more than professional. For more further ability, she needs assistance in doing so. Demetri was more kind enough to ask her out to their manor gardens, which made her grateful, but first she needs to her mother's permission, or she wouldn't accept of her being with strangers without the need of protection. Demetri and Hollow would sneak out of the manor and went to the gardens together. The boy felt slightly prepared, as if he'd never danced with a lady before, but he endured a smile as the envelope and his father's words remained in his head, and counting. He was close enough to her to first use this form of dance with hands to feet. Overall, he seemed focused on the ground, worried that he may trip or step on her while looking at her eyes. But as a couple minutes passed, their hearts felt relaxed. A silent serenade filled the area, 2 moons watching over them. A few days passed and their love remained undying. At first, Demetri already knew Holly would have a bit of light sensitivity with his spells, so he demonstrated his music on the lute before he ever does with his magic, leaving her fascinated by the outcome of his songs. Another is pulling a Marie and Alaman when he comes to food sharing. Doing so, their faces heated and both had told themselves with sheeted blankets, but over the time they grew to adore doing this in their spare time. Demetri made the meadow history into being the first male heir to experience signs of the sprouted phase. It occurred after he awoke quickly with him noticing something touching or sticking to him and thought it was leeches until he saw glowing petals. Like his previous grandmother, Juna took him to the garden tower until the effects wore off. According to the situation, he seemed to be murmuring Holly over and over through the hearing. Outside the door, Juna, who ended up reporting this to Holly's parents for their speculation of the situation, her mother began saying, "See, I told you, I'm glad your son isn't around her during this. Magic can be pretty dangerous." To be honest, she wasn't wrong. In 237, at the age of 17, would begin his studies at Marie with Holly outside of music advantages. He began taking classes such as history involving architecture, kingdoms, ancestry, ancient celestial structures, etc., alongside and philosophy classes. Demetri there has increased his further knowledge, and his bond with Holly slowly extended more as they kept visiting each other even during supper breaks. In the late spring of 238, Duchess Juna announced she received an invitation by King Cheese about the annual cheese festival at Cheese, pending for the acceptance of the family's love for cheese, but also of property from the Duchess of helping for her trade of soy and almond milk for the new plate of cheese. Juna has noble duties under both her hands, so she gathered Duke Agate to go, but as much as Holly loves going, in terms of her not interacting with her mother much as she decides to stay off of traveling, but in her submission, she wanted them to return her favorite pepper jack and Swiss cheese on the way home to make sandwiches for Carnation. To Demetri, being the one chosen for this trip grew quite noticeable when he hasn't been to a single kingdom for his past life. His mother halted his studies for during the spring break. Demetri secretly hid his lute wand in a bag fit for it and the spell book for many signs of protection for the harm he has gotten. It's even said that he held his journal he brought from college, a photo of him and Holly, and 3 red apples he was given by her for needing an appetite before departure. After the destination was taken on a ship to the watch harbor before their carriage through the towns further down the seaside, Demetri expected the kingdom to have an environment of rivers and mountains, all yellow and made of just cheese. Most likely been to that one dream of being in that same landscape where he views our element. With the help of tourism instructor to the location of the kingdoms, they were visited and bid a welcome by the royal family of cheese. King Cheese guided them from their awe attraction with a fancier route through hallways with a barquet theme and cheese-patterned curtains and rugs. The young lord's partial interest grew to the only plain view portraits of plated cheese introduced by their past ancestors. This is where he was caught in the corner of the eye by the sight of a rusty veiled, color-haired, and copper-eyed princess, Fabienne Cheese. Fabienne has a personality of open-minded and so lucky person. Like the young lord even has been honest to having a fair relationship to her, so on with her telling some corny jokes related to cheese and explaining what types of cheese he liked. For hers it is mimolette and mascarpone during suppers and dinners through taste and texture. For Demetri it's hard to tell what he admitted to wanting to try Parmesan badly. He was surprised by the introduction of her other 2 twin siblings that almost looked like Fabienne, expected they must have darkened genes, but with freckles. Both their names were Clara and Clarissa. Whenever the 2 girls fight or encourage Demetri from Clara wanting to have a tea party, or Clarissa with views of the cow farm, the older princess irrationally ordered them to make room for one instead of both of the lord can have his space and spare time. Fabienne explained that she was old enough to instruct the girls in their youth, and despite the tiring cause of fights between the girls, she still loved them. Demetri and Fabienne had at times wanted to have a platonic relationship, avoiding any chance of marriage affair that was going to be chosen from her father. This is due to the private conversation of him acting strange during their night's feast. The reason is Demetri already having a long date with Holly back at their isles, and he didn't want to ruin her feelings for cheating on her. Fabienne has worried about his father's condition into wanting to choose a man for her, but had avoided this since she was pressured a bit into being queen and instead having what's right on her own terms, hoping the king himself accepts this problem she had. By standards of trying to not elongate this as possible, it was one of the young lord's last well-known records, stunned by orchard historians alike. Only a day later at the castle, under preparations before the festival, King Cheese chose the event planners, one of them being Fabienne, and Demetri to round the packages for many citizens' cheese shop owners setting up food tents. Demetri, while carrying a box of Florida cheese, he saw a similar baby rodent chewing on somewhat a cracker. Little did he know, he ran from him. He became curious. He did much as he could not to lie, only taking breaks so she couldn't say no to that. He followed it to the hole that led to the underground sewage filled with wastewater that could have smelled like moldy cheese. It was noticed that he wasn't familiar with sewage presence in their kingdom. He was seen by the same baby rodent again, only this time it would be his last. Demetri, as he tilted slightly above his eyes, widened like saucers in horror at the sight of the red eyes staring down at him, and the falling like bugs from the ceiling, he almost dropping his candle. screaming as it burnt with his finger, that also the many rats that hissed at him. He had no time to think about his loot as he quickly ran back, finding the passage out of the darkness and out from the river bank leading there. To top it off, their appearance can either be mixed with gray and brown fur with red and yellow eyes. They have a smelly odor, and they must have been in their sewage home for periods of, or maybe more. Demetri surfacing the sewage. The princess awaited enough for him. Over the course of a break, she saw him before she could protest about the pavement. He held to her, yelling, "Rats! Evacuate them!" Fabian grew anxious, reported this to her father as well as his event planners, who only begun. The preparations were cancelled, and the squealing of the herd is coming close. The short-come presence in the town has turned into a state of mass panic as news spread. Doors and windows were completely shut, as many rats in a matter of minutes munched or attempted hoarding and cheese, as well as bakery and dairy stores, with some closed by the owners there, greatly worried or startled by their eyes of the ravaging teeth. While the knights were demanding into a public eye to put as much rats as they could in a bag without harming them, a serious rallied meeting with King and Queen Cheese began after hoarding off the castle doors for the time being. Many emotions set fire with confusion, scare, etc., until the events coordinated silenced them. As everyone, they parted questions, starting towards Fabian and Demetri, who stood alert within their eyes. Demetri was first to explain the rat incident taking place in the sewers, believing to have taken the blame for letting them storm in the first place. Agate puts trust into his son to not push all of them into him, considering he was responsible and has more trust for an ally than he has thought. King Cheese implied that they have kept examining the sewers at the same bank after there were reports of the scratches and noise, along with eyes occurring there. So mayhap Demetri's supposed exposure seemed to attract them to their alleyway. The only way the Lord could do is by brainstorming a plan to rid the rodents, placing a spell book for many clues for a fitting spell. At first he couldn't contain any physical strike towards the small species, like the golden shattering club. It would have been harsh towards them, not a magical one like Dove's harp, since it was only effective when a species of our Mewni gets injured. The only expectation? It gave him a fine idea. They have no more long time, as a panting man in knight armor startled in, implying to them that the bags weren't a helpful item toward the chewing maws they carry from their mouths. King Cheese told them to find any stronghold bags to carry it off. But before he knew, Demetri raced with a lute and a spellbook, a sudden delight rising on his face. Now Demetri himself in a position with the knight's commander, who held him to find a bigger cage to maneuver the rats and lay it in a further area outside the kingdom. Somewhere near a riverbank there he found the sewers. At last, under the daybreak, he let his magic command and break free. The lute hit an enchanting tune along his singing, motioning still all the species. What gathered all eyes was the rats dancing, smiling, and moving towards him as he lured them into the cage filled with enough cheese to last a bunch. He pulled to his feet in exhaustion, shouting, "Thanks, Celestia," before falling over again. Demetri received slight claw scratches, no signs of hard injury according to the healer individuals. Despite this, he is deeply admired by the royal guests, and King Cheese gave him a favor instead of wanting to marry his daughter, thankfully for promising her consent. He can be given as much salary as he wants, doing in a simple job in their castle. He respected the king's words, but his most preferable answer is trying Parmesan cheese while the festival is planned. There are no signs of damage among the castle town, except for the small cracks in display windows. No sign of injury had cost of Mewmins, which made the salvation remain unfortunate. This would be later known today as the cheese rat invasion of 238. While the family's return gave an earnest respect from their mother and the amount of wide crowd, his imposing actions were greatly celebrated, even for earning him the title of the Renovator at the young age. As thoughtful commendation was offered to Meadow from Butterfly after they rang the ears of Cheese. In 2:40 a.m., Demetri was married to Holly, offering her a camellia on her forehead. He became present just 2 days later, enough to be declared Duke at the time. This variation of tiara was adorned of honey calcite, grand with rose gold, compared to Juna's being the first Duke-Duchess to share the same gold coating from their predecessor, Demetri's tiara. His years of ruling overall was quite brief. Juna as a mother showed him the directions of being considerate towards duties often. Demetri would send letters to Fabian urging one's peers, as well as being invited to encourage her on her marriage and coronation in the autumn of 245 a.m. After Etheria ascended to the throne, he was unsure of visiting due to his mother's problematic commission, but on the side note, he can offer her contract and trade of sending her favorable type of flowers to lift her spirits, which it helps very much. In 246, Duchess Juna died at her deathbed due to natural causes. Demetri halted his studies to visit his mother one last time before she was buried in the mausoleum. It did not bring happiness at all, but he yearns for her dearly. In mid-253, before their open date with Toast, Holly said she was nauseous yesterday, and it claimed to test the pregnant with a child. Demetri felt the pressure kick, and even before he had continuously streaked in his journal about the progression of having a baby. In 254, they were welcomed a baby heiress named Lupa, and 2 years after was her youngest sister Pandora. One detail remained of the firstborn, that the howls heard at night, leaving them in unknown speculation. In 259, his father Duke Agi would pass away in the deathbed at the age of 67, when Lupa turned 5. Demetri's insight happened to be in his journal, describing his sad thoughts as an old string full of life that snapped and fell apart. At 267, after the tragedy of the Lupus massacre, which declares Etheria's death, Demetri's ordered package of hydrangea, dahlia, an orchid decorated in her colors for the funeral to honor her. He even has given his essential support to Butterfly as well as Queen's Guard, despite not being involved in military aspects, not his sort of thing. Demetri passed the fairy wand to Lupa in 268. On the same day, he gifted her a bronze telescope and took her to the constellation gaze during a picnic. To corresponding with Lupa's chapter, expect it wasn't explained in detail. The incident would almost take his daughter's life by one of his dwarves of the pack, biting her on the shoulder, and was left to bleed out on the stone floor by them. He was so anxious through it all that Holly couldn't bear to stand him in this state and tried in her sorrow to comfort him. The other events afterwards would occur in her chapter due to the lifelong effects in the change of her personality. Before Lupa's birthday, Holly told him a miserable report that she's suffering an illness, deteriorating her health, unable to last for 2 or 3 years. The last she ever wanted is to spend more time with their daughter walking in shoes. In 274, Duchess Holly died in her sleep at the Healers at the age of 53 from complications of natural illness when Lupa is only 20. She was not only buried in the graves of St. Primrose and her family's commiseration, but was ordered by Demetri to have her coffin made of the camellia, her favorite flower. After the funeral, he played his remarkable music on his lute for her now deceased body. In 276, Demetri put an end to the rise to his ruling after Lupa was engaged and married in the church. Passing the blooming flower on top of her head, he took a pleasure of giving her the most satisfactory party he could, gifted her with many talents and gestures and songstresses requested for orchard, as well as well-known ones from 1 or 2 kingdom continents. Sadly, in 278, his life has come to an end when Pandora found her father on a floor, clutching his chest and weakly heaving. She ordered the housemaids to bring the healers, but it became too late. His last research on philosophy studies remained untouched for years to come. Duke Demetri died a victim of alcohol poisoning at the age of 58. According to the autopsy, he's gone into wine to calm his depression from the passing of his beloved wife. Having a younger daughter gave him struggle, but instead of that, he found light in the lost one. Queen Mother Fabian, before the funeral, gave the family packages of cheese roses days later to honor her dear friend's passing. He was buried in St. Primrose, reuniting with his mother but also his wife. Orchard mourned for 5 weeks, thus ending the tale of their first male heir. Demetri and Holly, Under the Moonlight.